Hi there, welcome. It's Lucy here from Inclusive Change at Work Community Interest Company. We're an organisation based in South Gloss, and we're here to talk to you today about neurodiversity and work. We're specifically hoping to talk to parents and carers, teachers, careers professionals, all about this topic of the transition from education to employment for young people who are neurodivergent or disabled. We're funded from South Gloss Council, and South Gloss Council have given us this funding from their Learning Difficulties Development Fund so that we can talk to you. And we're also talking to employers about being more inclusive around roles and recruiting neurodivergent and disabled talent. But I'm joined today by Lou Temlett. Hi, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for hosting me, Lucy. And I think this is an incredible topic that parents, carers, and educators will gain a lot of knowledge from this presentation.
I hope so. We've been doing these sessions in person over the past year in a couple of different locations, particularly in some specialist schools and autism schools. And we've had feedback and we're trying to tweak it, but we know that many parents can't get to those sessions. They can't get to those face-to-face sessions. And hopefully having something online will mean that you've got something that you can download and watch at your leisure. You can do it when you need to, and we're going to hopefully chunk it up into bits. So by the time you get to see it, you'll get it in different sections. It won't all be one big thing. So let's start and let's let you know what we're going to be doing. Okay. So in the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about how we can support or how you can support your team to make the transition from education into employment. And you're probably sitting there thinking, hang on a minute. When do I have to start thinking about this? Well, we're going to talk exactly about that. We're going to explore a bit about neurodiversity, what it is, what it means for your family, and how to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. We are going to think about how and when to begin thinking about careers. We're going to talk about options for post 16, and we're going to discuss how to plan and prepare for employment. Whoosh! That's a lot of stuff, Lou, isn't it?
Or we can condense it and understand your viewpoint. Help, I have a neurodivergent child. And what does the future of work hold?
That was our alternative title, wasn't it, Lou? So I've done this stuff before, and when we do it, sometimes it can be really overwhelming. I totally get it. And so we were talking about some feedback about this, and we said, can we have an alternative title? So that alternative title was, hang on a minute, I'm gonna get it out. Let me see if I can find it. No, that's not going to happen for me. So that alternative title was, help, I have a neurodivergent child. What does the future of work hold? Lou, that was a brilliant title. Thank you. Do you think that makes more sense than the things that we've put on the screen there?
I hope so. And I hope it really starts to allow parents and carers to feel supported and reassured at some of the topics we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So I've got a few ground rules. All right. This is just something that I talk about in pretty much every single one of my sessions, regardless of what we're talking about. Neurodiversity is a big topic. We cover a wide variety of things. We will mostly talk about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and dyspraxia, but we do cover other stuff too. Everyone should feel safe to discuss this topic. It's big, but we welcome challenges, we welcome questions, we welcome points of clarification. Don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. That's okay. Respect confidentiality. So we're going to talk about stuff. We don't mind. It's going on the internet. We know. But if anybody puts anything in any chat or anybody puts anything in any comments following this video, just respect confidentiality and respect that people have taken time to come out and put some posts there. So please be kind in the comments. That's all I'm going to say. There's no requirement to share any personal information, whether you're online with us or whether you're putting stuff in comments. But if you want, you can. And if after this you think, I'd like to have a chat, I'd like to find out more, I wonder if you can help us, get in touch. We'll give you contact details at the end. Okay. So I talk a lot at the beginning of any of these sessions. And before I introduce myself, I want you to meet Lou. Hi, Lou.
Hello. Okay, so I am a fellow director at Inclusive Change at Work, very much supporting the mission to support neurodivergent and disabled young people through the kind of top end of education into employment or self-employment or even entrepreneurship. I'm a parent governor, so I have experience within the primary education. I'm also an online safety governor, top 40 podcaster, and bringing all of that together, I have 30 years working in the IT industry, which really gives me a sense of awareness about technology changes, job role changes, and all sorts of things that we're going to start talking about today. Um, I have experience in HR and in corporate roles. So when it comes to kind of business and kind of policies, procedures, and various other things, I can support as well. I'm also a single parent of two incredible children, going through the education system. I'm an entrepreneur managing caring handwork. Okay. This is when you don't read the slides. I'm also a life coach and an MBTI coach. Yeah, never read the slides. Thanks for that, Lucy.
Oh,
I'm Lou.
sorry. The entrepreneur bit around managing, caring for your children and trying to work. It's hard
Oh, yeah,
sometimes. And it's like, even as a parent, you have to make choices about your career and you have to make choices about what you do. And so sometimes, and I'm hoping people can resonate with that because we're trying to do everything sometimes.
absolutely.
Right. A little bit about me. Okay. So I founded Inclusive Change back in 2020, but I started to talk about this probably 2016, 2017. And by this, I mean neurodivergence and particularly autism, because I'm a parent to, I use the word incredible always, neurodivergent teenagers now. They're 18 and 16. So they are embarking on their careers and embarking on their aspects of their working life, particularly my 18-year-old. But they're autistic and they have different needs and different challenges. My 18-year-old in particular would struggle to work indoors, wants to work outdoors, is cognitively able, so bright, but has lots of challenges around socializing, around communication, around anxiety. That meant they couldn't be in school. So from the age of 12, they didn't attend school. They were educated at home with an EHCP. So I've been through that process of educational health and care plans, of psychologists, of talking about careers at some point in that EHCP and pushing the point to say, we need to talk about this because they're going to leave school. And knowing also that there was a whole ton of other stuff going on at the same time that I'm trying to manage right there and then, keeping them safe, keeping them healthy and well, being able to understand how we get their needs met in different situations. One of the things I will say is that my children don't have learning difficulties. And so their difficulties and their challenges come through being autistic, not necessarily through being learning in different ways. And so sometimes it can feel, hang on a minute, that this isn't relevant to me because my child has got learning difficulties and I don't think they'll be able to work. I'm hoping through this session that we can explore that and we might be able to think about, actually, yes, you can, but we will have to do things differently. We will have to put support in place. And I'm hoping that we can give a few pointers of where that support might come from. So I would say I've been where you are. If you are starting to think about careers with your young people, I've been there. And I'm kind of coming through, and now this is why I do what I do. We're working with South Gloss Council in this project. I work with businesses and organisations on a daily basis, and I'm a careers enterprise advisor with the West of England Combined Authority. So I work with specialist schools, actually. So I work with different schools in the area to talk about careers, particularly for disabled and neurodivergent young people. And Lou, I've banished imposter syndrome. in the past couple of weeks, I've started putting, I'm an expert in neurodiversity in the workplace.
Good. You absolutely are. There's no question about that.
I feel I'm not a psychologist or an educational psychologist. I don't have a degree in this. I think I probably could teach a degree in this now. But I've eventually got to a point where I do say I think I'm an expert in neurodiversity in the workplace. So that's me, and that's Lou, and this is why we're here today. So we've done our introductions. We're now going to talk a bit about what do you know? What do you know about this word neurodiversity and this phrase? We're going to have a very, very brief look at what is neurodiversity. But what we will do is send a link to other resources that we have that will talk about neurodiversity in a lot more detail. So we have other videos and other resources that will help take that a little bit further. But for this session right now, we're going to make a little bit of an assumption that you might know a little bit already about neurodiversity. We specifically talk about neurodiversity. We do also talk about disability, and we talk about special educational needs too. But in this session, we are going to focus on neurodiversity. So some of the words that you see on the screen will include things like neurodivergent, neurotypical. Have you heard some of these words, Lou? What do they mean to you?
Well, I feel it's a bubble or a cloud that could describe any of us at any moment, including our children. And I think, you know, kind of having some identity actually sometimes is really important to be able to establish what needs we have, the fact that we might have a different strength in business or in education, and to kind of embrace some of those differences.
Fantastic. So if I'm going to describe or give you a definition of neurodiversity, it's kind of here. Neurodiversity describes the infinite variety of human neurocognition, which is a bit of a big medical word. Basically, all our brains work differently, all right? And so neurodiversity is about recognizing that our brains work differently. And in the diagram on this page, and you can see all those circles that go around the head that says neurodiversity in the middle of it. This comes from Nancy Doyle, Professor Nancy Doyle now, from Genius Within, but it's based on the work of Mary Colley. We'll put references later. I think the word neurodiversity in there could be changed to neurodivergence at the moment, because all of those words and phrases in those circles relate to neurodivergence. And so if we're talking about neurodiversity is about everyone, neurodivergence is, it would probably describe those people that sit outside of the norm. And I'm doing that with my fingers, if you can see it on a video and you're not just listening on the radio or on audio. If you can imagine a bell curve, so a curve, and inside that middle bit, you've got everybody that kind of is society's norms. The way we think and process the world might be expected. You know, when Lou, one of the things you mentioned in your intro is you are an MBTI practitioner. And in terms
Yeah.
of understanding cognition and the way people's brains work, how does that map out? How does that work?
Well, it's not really kind of mapping things out. It's how an individual sees themselves and their personality. So it's very much allowing the individual to own their own preferences and to be clear or not so clear in this very moment about their personality preference. So it's kind of a different strand of things, but it's
Okay.
really helpful to have an awareness about things that we prefer more than things that we might not prefer.
So going back to this idea of neurodiversity, then people who are neurodivergent generally don't fit the norm, so don't fit that kind of expectation and might sit outside of it in different spaces. And some conditions And I tend to use the word conditions, but you will see the word disorder. That's because in terms of medical definitions, you will expect to see those kind of words sometimes. But those conditions are in those circles on this page. So you've got things like dyslexia, ADHD, Tourette's, mental health, autism, dyspraxia, and dyscalculia. And I've left out acquired neurodiversity to the end. Lou, have you heard of acquired neurodiversity?
Do you know what? I was looking at the screen going, I understand about acquired disability
Mm.
because there's a high percentage that of individuals in the workplace that acquire their disability over time. But I don't know very much about acquired neurodiversity. Explain a bit more.
So, acquired neurodiversity, we're not all born neurodivergent. Generally, somebody who's got ADHD or autism or dyslexia, you're probably born with it. However, there are some things that will happen to us in life that will make our brains work differently. And so something like PTSD, something like a brain injury or a stroke will mean that our neurodivergence, our neurocognition, our way of processing the world will change. And so we acquire neurodiversity through our life. Does that make sense?
It does. And I
Yeah.
think, thinking about some of life's behaviors, when we're in a stress situation, we might then kind of settle down and find very much more structure in our lives where we might not have had it before, or the other way around,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on from this page, but you may recognize many of these conditions and some of these conditions. You may recognize some of these conditions for your young person or your teenager. Particularly, we could be talking about ADHD and autism and dyslexia, but also Tourette's or dyspraxia. We don't cover mental health in great detail in this session, but we do recognize that mental health can impact the way that our brains work and the way that we see the world. And that might include things like anxiety and depression. So those kind of things now are kind of covered under that big umbrella of neurodivergence. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about neurodiversity. So one of the things I would say is that employers are really starting to recognize the benefits of workplaces that are inclusive and welcome neurodivergent thinking. And so the benefits of a neurodiverse workplace where we absolutely value everybody's brains and the way that we work um, can be things like greater creativity, innovation, representation of your community and your clients and your customers, better services and products because you've tested them, you've talked about them, you realize that actually that jumper is really scratchy and that somebody who has sensory processing differences might not be able to wear it. So let's take some of the things out and change it. There are also things like inclusion, greater inclusion, and loyalty from your staff and your team. Lou, how do those resonate with you?
It sounds very inclusive. Apologies for the kind of use of the word, but it feels like we're really um, kind of understanding the strengths of an individual, being able to understand them as an individual, for them to be represented within an organization, and actually increasing the reliance and reliability of products and services because someone might think quite differently, and make improvements in processes and products and services.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, we've talked a bit about neurodiversity and what it is. We will send you some more links to that as well, because there's a lot more we could explore in that. But we wanted to make this really focused on what do you need to know about careers and post 16 options for young people with SEND and neurodivergence. So, we're starting with some questions. So, things like, what do they want to do? What does your young person want to do? What information is available? Who can help? What can you do? What post 16 options are there? But then also, what careers advice is relevant, because some people in mainstream schools might not be getting advice that is relevant for them, that supports them in a way that they need. And then let's think about what are their strengths and what are their challenges. So we're going to talk through pretty much all of these questions in the rest of this session. Lou, is there anything else that you would add on there?
As a parent, when you ask your child what they want to do, they haven't got any idea. But actually, as a parent, observing some of their strengths, some of the things that they're really good at, is always worth keeping in mind, because whilst they may not be able to see their strengths and amazing qualities, you as a parent living with them day in, day out will be able to observe and kind of make a mental note of what they're amazing at to
Yeah.
support them in making decisions in the future.
Yeah. And there may be many different routes to get to where they can be and where they want to be, and it might not be a linear route. Like it might not be, hey, I'm going to do GCSEs, A levels, and then go to university and get my first graduate job. No, that might not happen. It
Yeah.
might happen that they do their GCSEs, take a break, do their A levels, take a break, do their GCSEs, or not do their GCSEs actually, but go into some form of vocational education and look at things in a different way. There may be very many routes that you can take, and not all of them are linear and have to be the way that we're told sometimes in terms of careers advice. And finding out what people are interested in, you can do that in lots and lots of different ways. So after looking at all those questions, I think it's going to be useful to start thinking about, how will the workplace be different from education? And I think for me, this is the first part of understanding what a transition might look like from education into either the workplace or adult services. So the first things that we will start to notice, particularly when they get to 18, is that you move into adult services. And so adult services, when you've been supporting a young person who is maybe needs extra support around their mental health, or has services in terms of their education and health and care plan, you are going to move from the school or from the team who looks after the under 16s to the 16 to 25 team. And then you're also going to move into adult services around social care and support. So there will be different things that will be happening in different aspects of their world that will change when you move out of education and into either the workplace or into supported work and different things that we'll talk about in a moment. There can be less support. So you might not have that EHCP around you, particularly past the age of 25. Your educational health and care plan can last until it is 20, until you are 25. However, there will be support after 25, but you will be working with adult services around that support. There isn't a right to employment. So I quite often think about education and employment. And when we're talking about education, I see there is a right to education. Children have a right to an education. Some of you might choose to home educate, all right? That may be a choice you have made, not through a desire, but because you might feel like you have no other choice. Some of your children may not be able to access school because their needs are not being met. Some of your children may not be able to access school because there isn't a space for them. These things are really difficult and really challenging. But when we get into the world of employment, there isn't a right to employment. And so we have to work slightly differently to ensure we can find employment and that employment works for us and that we can contribute and be part of a community. How do those things sit with you, Lou?
I think the last thing you said about being part of a community is ultimately one of the kind of most important things that I've just taken away from that conversation. Whilst all of those things are really important, it's about feeling supported as a parent and as a young person in the workplace, the transition from education to employment, but also your key point about employment not being a right. Actually, we all have to work and kind of
We want to work, many of us, yeah.
we do, and I think it's knowing that that's available, that there are still going to be challenges, but there are opportunities available, and I think it's knowing that there's hope and there's opportunity is, you
Yes,
know,
yeah.
is key.
So something else that will happen in terms of being in the workplace is that people around them supporting them are going to be working with your child and not necessarily with you. You will need to get permission. You will need to have authority or uh, be the, I can't think of the word with the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, appointee for your adult child in order to manage their affairs. And that's a whole other topic. So if you're listening to this and watching this and going, actually, I need to know more about that, we will try and cover that in a whole other area and provide you some resources of where you can find out more about that, about being an appointee or a deputy and supporting your child where you feel that they may not be able to do so themselves. One of the key areas that I think can be really helpful in the workplace is something called access to work. Access to work we'll talk about in a bit more detail later on. And we have some other videos that we will link you to so you can find out about it, a bit more about it. But access to work is for disabled employees. It is a Department of Work and Pensions scheme that is worth up to £69,000 per individual to get support, mentoring, coaching, technology, adaptations, a whole range of things in place that can enable a disabled person to thrive in the workplace. Getting into a job through interviews, you can get support through access to work, and you can get support when you are in work. I'm not going to dwell on it a lot at the moment, but Lou, it's something we work at Inclusive Change at Work. Our community interest company works a lot with clients who use access to work, don't we?
Absolutely, and I think there are so many different ways that individuals can be supported, whether it's through coaching or, like Lucy's kind of saying, equipment, and we'll hear some live case study bits later on in how individuals
Yes.
have been supported through access to work.
Yeah, we're going to bring in a voice from our team who is supported through access to work, and he'll tell you about his experience of being an apprentice and the support that he gets around that. So we've looked at very briefly what the differences are between work and education. And some of those things can feel quite scary, to be quite honest with you. And I feel, as a parent who's gone through this, and I found out my children were autistic when they were 11. So I didn't have any concept of the world was going to be different for us until they were that age. And once we got our educational health and care plans, and we really needed those for different reasons, there comes a point where my brain went into what's going to happen when they leave school? What's going to happen when they're 16? And everything I started to do was about getting to that point. It was about the here and now, because I had to look after my children and make sure that they stayed alive and were able to engage in the world. But similarly, I had always had one eye on what the future was going to look like. Lou, is that something that resonates with you? Is that something that you see yourself?
I think it's always mindful to, when you have children, that you always hope for the best future for them.
Mm.
And as a parent, having that awareness as to the next steps, as well as, dealing with the here and now, their safety and well-being for the existing moment. But you have hopes and dreams for the future, or maybe fear and despair. There are lots of different feelings that us as parents can go through when we have a neurodivergent or a neurotypical young person to look after.
Yeah, I will openly admit, and my children know it, that I do worry about what will happen if I'm not here. So we're going deep into this point, and so I want people to know that these are the things that are normal to think about, and it's okay to ask these questions. But what we're trying to do in this session is to start getting you thinking about how can you get prepared? How can you prepare your young person? And how can you prepare yourself? And how can you help prepare others if you're a parent or a teacher or a professional in that way? How can you help other people prepare for what's going to happen post 16? And there are some options, all right? It isn't bleak. There are options, I promise you. Yeah. So you've got choices. So let's start and look through this list. And there may be other things on this list that I haven't put in here, but let's start with a few so that we don't overwhelm ourselves completely. Post 16 education. So you could be looking at school or college, sixth form. You could be looking at college. Quite a lot. Now, we're based in South Gloss, but we cover and we talk to people in all areas of the Southwest in particular, but all over the country. But there may be a sixth form in your specialist school, and so I certainly know in the Southwest there are some really good schools. And we did an in-person session over in Venturers Academy in Bristol, and they have a post 16 offering, so they can take children up until the age of 19. So most post 16 offerings will offer up until the age of 19. You may find in a college there will be options around GCSEs, around BTECs, there will be options around T levels, there will be options around preparing for adulthood. So if your young person isn't quite yet ready to step into, that next step of college that you think is traditional, actually, there will be options around preparing for adulthood, which are great at providing that supported step-by-step approach. And your children can stay there for longer than you usually think, actually. You will find that your EHCP, if you have an educational health and care plan, and I'm hoping that I'm talking to people who do and don't have an educational health and care plan here. And actually, I really want to talk to people who don't have an educational health and care plan, because quite often you're in a place where you're thinking, I'm not getting any support. Where do I go? What do I do? And you might find that your young person, your child, gets an educational health and care plan when they leave school, because they haven't got access to other stuff, and it's suddenly recognized, thank goodness, that they need that extra support and protection around a educational health and care plan. That's easy for me to say, isn't it, Lou?
Yes, it fills a number of us with fear and anxiety and all of those things, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But
No.
I think preparing ourselves as parents and individuals to support our young people and our children is really incredibly important.
And think what we're talking about here, we're talking top level, all right? We can't go into individual stuff, but there are places that you can get that support. And I would start at school to ask those questions in the first instance. So you might find, if your young person has an educational health and care plan, an EHCP, I'm just going to say it like that from now on, you might find that a supported internship is open to them. Supported internships are something that it's about getting into the world of work, and it's usually a year-long program where you work with a college or a training provider, an employer, and the funding mechanism, which usually comes from the local authority, which is why I generally say you need to have an EHCP. And there are various employers now in Bristol and in South Gloss who are working with the local authorities to create some really great supported internship opportunities. They're not paid for an individual generally, all right? Sometimes it can be, because they're given it's a very supported environment, and they're provided training and employability skills to help them get to that next step, which hopefully is employment. You may find options around independent living are something that you might want to look for. And I've put the word in supported in there because they generally will be places that your young person might go and live without you. So they go and live in a residential, in a college setting, which they're able to get a whole load of independent living skills and gain them whilst they're in those settings. There are places locally like Ruskin Mill, National Star College, and there's a few others, but the other one I'm thinking of is Western Bay, which is part of Western College. Fantastic. All right, start talking about those and finding out about them with your teachers and with the people that are part of your support team already. Now, going into the world of work, Lou, we've got things like employment, apprenticeships, volunteering, and self-employment. And I put that bit at the bottom there about, what if you haven't got an EHCP? Where do you go? And generally, I think you're going to the route of apprenticeships, employment, volunteering, and self-employment.
Yep.
There will be support out there, and I will talk about some of the programs that happen locally for young people who are disabled and neurodivergent who don't have an EHCP. And there is stuff available, but hold on to that because I'll talk about it a bit later. How does all that sound to you, Lou?
It sounds fantastic. I want to hear more.
Right, let's go then. Okay. So we're talking about employment and careers. And one of the first questions I start to ask, or I get asked, is when should you start thinking about careers? And my easy answer is as early as possible. Now, that can seem, I've put on that slide, at least in year 9. In the UK, that's kind of 13, 14-year-old. However, in terms of careers advice now and benchmarks for careers advice and planning, schools are meant to be talking about careers education from the age of 8. That can seem a bit, whoa, hang on a minute. What does that feel like to you, Lou? 8 years old.
Well, I still feel that's a bit late, Lucy, because
Oh, controversial.
well, when I was growing up, it's kind of, you have dreams about being a nurse. I couldn't quite face the blood and the, injections and things,
Injections.
but
Yeah.
I always wanted to be a teacher. And you try and play out all of those different things. And I think we're all very different, but I think some of us equally have experience of when we were 4 or 5, we wanted to be this, that, or the other. And whether
Mm,
we've lived out those dreams and aspirations is another story. But I
mm,
think, some of the role play that some neurotypical individuals and others play out in our early years is just picking up some of those strands that may not have been so reinforced in today's education because it's so overwhelming with curriculum and various
yeah.
other things. The sense of self has slightly been taken away, but bringing some of those things back into conversation and supporting our young people.
That we've gone deep, haven't we? But I think you're absolutely right. That sense of self and that sense of awareness. One of the things I would say is about providing opportunities to explore different things and getting as many experiences as possible. And if you don't like it, then actually that's really helpful because you you don't like it. And so one of the things I did with my 18-year-old, when she was 15, 16, she didn't do work experience like everybody else. And that can be a big problem around SEND young people is getting work experience opportunities. She didn't do that at all. But when she was 16, nearly 17, we went and did a little bit of work experience in an office. And I went with her. I supported her, but I tried to be independent. But hey, but what she learned from that was, I don't like working in an office. I really don't like it. I can cope for an hour and then I need to leave the room and I need to get out. And so she's identified she wants to work outdoors. And so she's identified that she'd like to be in horticulture and gardening because that brings her joy. And that is something she feels as an autistic young woman that she will be able to sustain that career. So to explore these different things, to find out whether you like something or don't like something can be really, really helpful. And start that from quite a young age.
I think you're absolutely right in suggesting, exposing our young people and our children to different experiences, whether it's, running the accounts and setting up a spreadsheet, which might be a bit advanced, but actually, we both know some neurodivergent young people that are very into their numbers, very process driven, and would
Yeah.
absolutely thrive as a
Yeah.
potential accountant. Um,
Yeah.
who knows?
And,
There are lots of
and
possibilities.
even looking at things like their hobbies and their skills, but we'll talk a bit more about tapping into that in a moment. Start talking about careers and planning for post 16 in your EHCP review. So if you have an EHCP, you really should be talking about it. And if the people around you, the professionals, aren't talking about it, if you're a parent, you ask them to talk about it. You prompt them
Yeah.
and say, can we start talking about careers education, please? Can we start talking about post 16? And do that from year 9. In your EHCP, it should be covered from year 9. All right. But start talking about strengths, their wants, their interests. They could end up being their career. All right. We'll talk in a bit more detail about how to explore that in a mo. Definitely think about the challenges, but also recognize that those teenage years are a really fast paced time of development. And what was happening in year 8 when they're 12 years old is going to look very different when they're in year 11 and year 13. Right. So do think of what support they need, but also recognize that they will grow, they will develop, there will be different needs, and they will develop that maturity to be able to support themselves in different ways as they get older. Everybody's an individual though, and so you are going to see this in different ways at different times. So I'm not trying to generalize and go, hey, they're all going to be great, because they might not. But recognize that the teenage years are like the busiest years for our brain and our bodies. And they're just incredibly busy. And our brains keep growing, I think, until the age of 25, generally. However, I did read yesterday that neurodivergent people, actually, our brains might not get to full capacity until we're 30 years old. That's a long time, Lou, isn't it?
It is, but it's
Yeah.
also an amazing opportunity to know that there are 30 years of growth and development
Yeah.
in that young person.
Yeah. And we might make mistakes along the way, and they might make decisions and choices along the way that might not seem sensible, but they are growing, they're taking risks, and that's part of growing up. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, but it really is taking risks in your job, taking risks in your decisions about what you want to do. Sometimes we need to help and push that forward. But I think that's for another conversation. Sorry. Oh dear. Right, my slides have gone a little bit wonky again here. And the word you can't see. Right. The art of the possible. That's the word you can't see. I've obviously just done something before we came online. So the art of the possible is something I talk about a lot in terms of careers, enterprise, employment, and trying to think about what could be possible. So this is a way to start talking and thinking about careers with your young person. And here are 3 really, I think, really important questions. What can you do? So what are your skills? What do you love doing? So what's your passion or special interest? And what people will pay for. Do you think they're simple enough, Lou?
I think they are. I want to see the next diagram.
Oh, okay. Let's go. There we go. That's a bit better. So the art of the possible, all right? Thinking about those three questions, what can you do, what you like to do, and what people might pay for, you kind of get this bit in the middle, right, where that arrow is pointing to, and that's your sweet spot. That could be a career choice. That could be self-employment. That could be a skill that you develop and you nurture, and it becomes something that can earn you lots of money, or that can make you feel great, or that brings you value and joy and makes you feel, actually, I'm part of a community because I'm doing this stuff and it means something to other people. That was the diagram, Lou. Does that help?
It does, and I think whoever you are, these 3 factors are just incredible to be able to kind of refine and harness
Mm,
what it is that we might be doing in our career, in our lifetime.
mm. There is one other question, and there is one other thing to think about, which is what you can't do yet, but you might like to do. And that might fall into the what you like to do category, but you don't yet have the skill. You have to do some training, or you have to develop that, or you might need some help to do it. And those kind of things, that's one other question that isn't on there. But those 3 simple questions are a really good foundation of where you start to think about, actually, what can I do? What's my purpose? What can you do? What do you like to do? And what will people pay for? And that could be your job. There are, however, some things that are going to stop young people achieving success. So we have talked about what you could do. We have talked about options post 16. But let's be frank and let's be honest here. We do need to talk about some of the challenges that young people will face in achieving success. And these are the barriers to either getting into employment or staying in employment, or even the barriers in thinking that you could be employed at all. Now, I come from a strengths-based approach. I think, Lou, you and I align on that, about looking at people's strengths and seeing what they could do rather than what they can't do. And I think, considering some of these challenges on this screen, it's important to recognize that there will be internal and external factors that will be a barrier to getting into the workplace. And for me, this is where the crux of starting to talk about you as an individual kind of gets us to. So things like the support that's in place. Do you need support? Do you need support to get to work? Do you need support in work, around communication, around moving around in work, those kind of things? What support is needed in order to overcome those barriers and get equity in terms of getting a job and being in the workplace? We would also look at things like self-esteem. So internally, how do we feel about ourselves? Do we think we can do that job? Do we think that that's something that's within our ability? And sometimes we need help to recognize that, yes, we can, and push that self-esteem a little bit further than it should be. Sensory needs. Many neurodivergent and SEND young people will have sensory needs around sound, around vision, around smells. And it's one of the reasons I was talking earlier about my daughter, who finds it difficult to be in an office. And most of that is around the sensory aspect of being in an office, listening to the tap, tap, tap of a keyboard, hearing a mouse clicking, air conditioning, all of those things are sensory challenges that she would face. And so understanding those sensory needs might give you an idea of where to look for a career or what kind of career you might go in. So therefore, working outdoors is preferable to working in an office. Does that make sense, Lou?
It does. And I think one of the aspects of seeing all of those things that might stop young people achieving success is if we also understand our own needs in these things to be able to then relate and understand somebody else's viewpoint.
Mm,
Certainly with the self-esteem, that there's coaching available to really, kind of echo and feedback some of the strengths of an individual,
mm,
awareness of the sensory needs. When you were saying about the mouse clicking or the air conditioning, I think some of us have reactions or understanding as to how we might feel in those environments. So it's having that echoed awareness of how we
mm.
are and how our young people might react in those situations so that nothing's a surprise.
No, no. On here as well, we've got things like anxiety. Anxiety is going to be a barrier to stepping into that world of work sometimes and making that transition. And literally, I can talk for 3 hours on anxiety, and I'm not going to. But recognizing that it is there, it is highly likely going to be the predominant emotion that many neurodivergent people in particular will be feeling about being in the workplace. So, anxiety and understanding it and how to overcome it could be a barrier. But there are things that we'll talk about in the next slide that may be able to help overcome that. I'm leaving recruitment processes because I'll talk about that last, I think. The other areas are your knowledge. Do you have enough knowledge to do the things that you want to do? Do you need to get more knowledge? How do you get it? And that is linked to education. So the link to education there and that barrier could be that you haven't been able to access education. You haven't been able to get an access to an education in a way that suits and meets your needs. And therefore, you haven't had the same experiences as your peers. And so that education piece, again, I could probably talk for 3 hours purely on the impact of education and support for neurodivergent young people. However, recognizing it and knowing it's going to be a barrier, you may be able to put things in place and think about, well, actually, we are where we are. We can't go back. We can't relive that time. Let's think about how we can do things moving forward. And then lastly, recruitment processes. So a lot of these things on this screen are internal or things that will have happened to you in the education world, the world of education. But recruitment processes are things that employers need to do and need to think about. And not all recruitment processes are equal. Not all recruitment processes are going to provide equity for a disabled young person applying for a job. And so you may find that your young person needs help to advocate, needs to understand the system. You need to check that they've understood. But also, we need to help advocate and educate employers. And so, Lou, that's something we do on another level, don't we?
It is, but I think as a parent or a professional supporting young people, we have knowledge of the skills and abilities and the needs of our young people. And you mentioned the word advocate. If there's something that they need for an interview or a process, ask for it, and never
Mm.
be afraid to actually step up and say, this individual needs this. And I think probably we're all doing that regardless, but just a gentle reminder that we're here to support young people and
Mm.
ask for the things that they need.
I would highly recommend if you're an employer or if you're a professional or a teacher watching this, we have another session that we recorded for employers. I would highly recommend going to look at that. We'll send links. We'll put links in our notes with this as well. So, what can help overcome those barriers? And I have, in nice big words, access to work. I've already mentioned a little bit about access to work. It is probably the most best kept secret in the UK in terms of support and funding for adults in the workplace. This isn't just about young people. You don't just get it. You have to apply for it. You have to tell them what you need from it. It is a process. It is not a neurodivergent friendly process, I'm afraid. We do have other training around a manager's guide to access to work, and we have some toolkits and information available around access to work. And we can also point to places where you can get help to apply for access to work. But access to work exists to ensure that disabled people have the same the same equity in terms of getting a job and being in a job than non-disabled people. It is a hard thing to get through and apply for, but once you do, it is life-changing. But for young people going into the workplace, I think every young person who's coming out of college and school need to know, with their parents and those people that support them, need to know that this exists in order to help them in the workplace, because it will open up doors, it will help employers, and it will be something that can help you thrive in the workplace. There are a number of things that can help overcome barriers that can be included as part of funding for access to work, but may not. They may be something that's funded separately. And those are things like good preparation and planning. So listening to this session. So talking about careers in your EHCP reviews, having interview practice in schools, talking to your careers teachers in schools. All of those things are really good preparation and planning. Is there anything else you'd add on there, Lou?
I think you've pretty much covered it. Planning preparation, the coaching, mentoring, meeting the needs within the workplace. The actual access to work might also be the transportation,
Oh,
um,
yes.
and yeah, adjustments to the recruitment process. I think
Mm.
that's a kind of a two-sided um,
Yeah.
element there, and being supportive or supported within the workplace is fundamentally important.
Yeah. We've been asked a few times recently, actually, in sessions that I've been doing around, well, what adjustments could I have? Or when we ask candidates, so this comes from employers, when we ask candidates, what adjustments do you want? They say, oh, no, I don't need any. I'm okay. Well, of course they're going to say that. They want to get the job. They want to be seen as capable and not disabled. But if you were to offer those adjustments as an employer, if an employer offers those adjustments without you having to ask for them or find out what you need, wouldn't that be just so much more helpful? Just I've gone off on one now, Lou. I've gone off on one.
It's good. It's
Um,
good.
but all of these things can help overcome those barriers. And this is why we also talk to employers, because we want employers to pick up on this and see this and go, actually, this is what we need to do to make this difference. So we want to meet Cam. However, what I can see is that the audio isn't going to play. So bear with me. Okay, so we've talked a lot, haven't we, Lou? And
We have.
I think it might be time to hear another voice. And so we've roped in our digital communities apprentice at Inclusive Change to talk about his experience and his the support that he gets and what a difference that makes to him. So we want you to meet Cam. Cam works at Inclusive Change, and Cam is an apprentice. He's been working with us for about now, I think we're into 9 months. And I want you to hear from his voice what he does and how what he thinks about his work.
I am the Digital Communities Apprentice, which, I've, as it says in the name, I've created a community, but I mean, largely it's just I do what I'm told, but that's like creating blogs, emails, social media posts, anything to do with like digital engagement, which is a term that I've made up on the spot.
He hadn't made it up on the spot. It's actually what he does, digital engagement. One thing to mention about Cam, and he writes about his experience. He writes about what it's been like to move into the world of work. He's 21 and he's autistic and didn't have great support when he was at school and college. But here he is working with us 9 months in, and he's smashing his apprenticeship. He never really thought that he would. He didn't really know what he wanted to do and where he wanted to be. And Cam came through a route of actually work experience with us at Inclusive Change at Work, and then volunteered with us. And then when a role came up, we encouraged him to apply and put a lot of things in place so that it would make it easier for him to do that. Is there anything that you would add there, Lou?
He is doing absolutely fantastically, from someone that was feeling quite anxious and nervous about coming into a workplace to seeing an individual flourish in the workplace. And I think that's all we can hope for, or more than we can hope for, actually. It's been an incredible journey, which I'm sure we'll hear more about.
So yes, I've got a few more snippets from Cam. So let's hear a few more.
I am a lot because I don't speak up if I'm struggling. I kind of just sit and fester in the corner. But I'm being asked. There's constant, "Are you okay? Do you need help with this?" And it's useful because
Good.
it's nice.
So that question we asked him was, "What support do you get?" And he might not always notice and recognize the support that is there. But one of the things that we did was we made sure we had access to work in place for him when he started. And one of the supports, or one of the things that Access to Work funded, was taxis to and from work, because Cam really doesn't like public transport. And he's going to tell you in his own words about his thoughts about public transport.
Confidence, I think, is a big thing. I'm, doing the Ubers, which I wouldn't have done before.
Tell me what that means.
Yeah. So I don't like public transport. I avoid it as much as possible, which has been quite successful so far. And then there was the whole idea of me taking Ubers to and from work, which started with assistance, and then eventually it's now me going back and forth on my own, which is something that I would not have done at all.
He didn't think that would happen, but now, and in fact fairly quickly, he moved from getting support to being a taxi, and being there with somebody else, to now he sorts it out himself. He pays for, he arranges the payments, he talks to the drivers, all of that kind of stuff. It's a really regular occurrence for him, and we've just seen him grow in his confidence completely. And I can't wait to see what he's going to achieve by the end of his apprenticeship, to be fair. And we have one more question from Cam, which was, what would you say to somebody else who was thinking about an apprenticeship? So this is specifically thinking about apprenticeships. Now, remember, Cam doesn't have a really great view of universities. So bear that in mind when he answers, okay?
Do it. It's way better than university. I've heard only bad things about university after getting my apprenticeship. And, I feel like you're earning money, but you're being taught and you're learning at the same time. It's like job, college at the same time, rather than, spending like thousands to do nothing.
Yay, thanks, Cam. Interestingly, and this might be a little bit of a funny story, Cam's apprenticeship and Inclusive Change is sponsored by the University of Bristol. So they have heard him say that. And so they completely get it. What do you think of that, Lou?
I think it's an incredible growth and progress of a young person that is autistic in the workplace. And I think without the support of apprenticeships and access to work and all of the other things that we've spoken about, Cam may still be at home, not working, keeping himself away from public transport, from society, and inclusive change have allowed him to grow into the resilient, empowered, confident young person that he is today.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can achieve and where he goes next. He might stay with us, he might move elsewhere. But either way, I think we're very proud and we're very privileged to have Cam working with us. And he brings different perspective to our organization and our team. And he absolutely brings very different skills to some of our team too. So we have talked a lot in this session. We really, really appreciate you sticking with us. We are almost to the end now, okay? We want to round up by just summarizing some of the stuff that we've talked about in this session. So starting to prepare. You might want to think about things like research career options, research independent living, research local colleges, research. Just go and find out more information. And that might mean asking people at school or talking to the careers advisors. It's about finding out what's out there so that you can be as knowledgeable and armed with as much information as possible. Talk to your young person and teens about what could be possible. What is that art of the possible? And remember that diagram of those 3 questions that we can ask about what can you do, what do you like doing, and what you think people might pay money for. And some of that you might need help to explore that and take that a bit further. Find out about support in your area. And now we have a slide coming up where we have some stuff and information. We will also update this with resources on a dedicated webpage for this course. Think about skills that will help for the future. So think about things that you can experience or learn that will be helpful, but might not always seem relevant. Does that make sense, Lou?
Yes, I think it's not just the skill of the employment or the career that our children or young people want to go into. It's all of those peripheral skills that will need to be considered to be able to get them to have a successful future.
Yep. Work experience. Work experience can be more challenging to arrange. You may feel defeated. You may feel, oh, crikey. But there will be options, and certainly talk to your careers teachers. And there might be ways of doing things that aren't typical. So a whole week for somebody who is anxious and autistic might not be possible, but 3 short days probably are. And you're going to expose young people in the workplace to lots more experiences, to lots more ideas and things that they might find really interesting, or things that they go, actually, I really didn't like that. I never want to do that at all. And that final point on there is what might work for them. You might need to think differently. You might need to think outside of the box, as they say. But think about what might work for your young people. So I mentioned that we have a list of resources and we have information that can help you in looking for more information, in doing some research. I will update this on a web page so you can actually have the links and you can see where they follow through to. Okay. And on that point, I'm really annoyed because my slides are just that K really annoys me. On that point, we're going to finish. I want to say thank you, Lou. Lou, it's been an incredible pleasure to have you here today and us to talk about this conversation and see it from a number of different perspectives. What will you take away from this session?
Before my takeaways, I just want to thank you for your journey in all of this, because I think without your experience, your lived experience, to bring all of these factors together, to understand some of the processes that our educators, our parents, all of these young people are going through, is really important to have that echo and understanding in the first instance. But actually, going forwards, there are a host of possibilities and opportunities for young people. We have to advocate and ask for what is required and what's needed, but also opening our minds to hope and aspiration for the future, both for our young people and for ourselves as parents or educators.
Thank you. It's humbling to hear it. But yeah, I just want to use the knowledge that I've amassed over the years to help other people. I want to be able to get this information out there. And I know it can feel really super overwhelming sometimes. There's a lot to take in. There's a lot to take in this session. And by the end of it, you may well be thinking, that didn't help me at all. But I'm hoping that just that small step in starting to think about that conversation, it might help. It might help take us a bit further. So do get in touch if you need anything. Inclusive Change, you can find us online, Inclusive Change at Work, CIC. Our website is icaw-cic.com, okay? Because we figured Inclusive Change at Work to spell in a URL was just too long. So we went with ICAW. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you think about this session. If you have any feedback, please do let us know. And on that point, thank you so much, Lou. Thank you for everyone. Hopefully we're going to help along the way.